Mary! Mary! Come over here a minute. Here.
That was a pistol shot, wasn't it?
How'd that come here?
Been here a tidy while, too, by the dust on it.
Careful, Dad, there may be more bullets.
4 on them and 2 empty shells.
Best throw it away.
Throw away money? This be worth something.
How could there be 2 empty shells? You only fired 1.
Someone must have fired it afore me. I'm wondering what it's worth.
Oh, in the hardware man's in the best bar. He might buy it.
Oh, is he?
Well, how did the game go?
Terrible bad for us, sir.
Dear, I hope the marriage would humble the singles this year.
It's Jumbo, sir. We couldn't get him out. Scored all of 50, he did.
You must get him on your side. Jumbo, you'll have to get married before the next match.
There'll be a rare scandal if he don't, sir, according to what his girl's mother says.
30 shillings wouldn't be a lot to ask for that, Mr. Owen.
So you found it in your roof, did you?
Aye, that I did. What I find on my property belongs to me.
This revolver belongs to Mrs. Hamilton. The one that had Cove Cottage last year.
Not if she left it behind and I found it, it don't.
I sold it to her about 18 months ago. Here's my private mark.
When you come to consider, it's queer to buy a revolver and hide it.
Oh, I expect you put it in the roof out of the way.
No, it was hid, and hid very careful. And what's more, it had been fired.
Make much importance of that, William?
I don't know. This has set me a-thinking. Well, I'll see you later.
Mrs. Hamilton's a sore point with Trelease.
Aye. He's never got over that time she beat him in court. The grudge sits deep in our William. Going into market tomorrow?
Oh.
A good many of us thought there was a bit of a mystery about them Hamiltons. And when you come to find a thing like this in the roof, it makes you think, and think hard.
I've been harping on this all night and I'm fed up. Hamilton's been dead and buried a year. This is a place for live uns, not dead uns. I want to sing.
They laid her away on the top.
You've been poking about in that roof again, Dad?
Yes, and I remembered something. While you're getting ready for church, I'm going to slip across to see George Clark. George, just a minute.
Hey, that's so. I was riding my own bike at the time, and I thought I heard a shot that day.
Either you must have heard it or must not have heard it, George. If you did hear a shot fired, where did the sound come from?
Why, from your cottage. At least, why, it was them Hamiltons then. You recollect, William, I mentioned it to you in the bar. That very day.
That's right, and if you recollect, George, that's before we knew he was dead.
You mark my words, there's something in all this. I always did think Hamilton died remarkable sudden.
Queer, I wanting a revolver. I'm sure I never wanted one.
Come on, Mary, this will be late.
I always thought it queer she should have been buried by Peters of Dimborne instead of brokers in the village.
In the last 3 weeks since the revolver was found, there's been a rare lot of talk.
There's no smoke without fire.
I'll take charge of this now, Trelease.
And here's the 2 empty shells, the one that I fired and the one that she fired.
The one that was fired by an unknown person.
Ah, well, whatever you may think, you mark my words. Mr. Knight will have a hand in this before it's done.
Good morning, Miss. Would Mr. Knight be able to sign these school summonses?
Well, Dr. McParvin's with him now, Sergeant.
Oh, is he? I've got some business with the doctor, too.
Oh, well, I'll see. Sergeant Foster says, could you sign some papers, sir?
Yes, yes. Come in.
Well, while you're signing them, sir, do you mind if I have a few words with the doctor?
No, not at all.
I wanted to speak to you about Thomas Hamilton, who lived at Cove Cottage, Doctor. You signed the death certificate, didn't you?
Certainly. So would anybody. He was suffering from valvular disease of the heart, aggravated by chronic nervous debility.
Can you help us on another point? We want to know how the Hamiltons got on together.
Oh, do you?
When the Hamiltons lived here, you will remember, Doctor, they never mixed with the villagers.
But we know you visited Cove Cottage very frequently, sir.
As a doctor. My patients' private affairs are their own concern.
But in the case of this kind, the relations between husband and wife...
It's none of my business and it's none of yours. Well, I must be getting back to my patients. Good day, Mr. Knight.
Do you think there's anything in all this talk about Hamilton's death, Sergeant?
Well, we didn't pay much attention to it at first, but some very queer things have come up.
Do you think there's any mystery about them?
Pretty sure of it, sir. County headquarters have taken it up.
Is that so?
Of course, a lot will depend on what the widow has to say.
And are you in touch with her?
Not yet. We've asked London to deal with her.
Sugar?
Please.
No. I believe you'd much rather have a whiskey and soda.
Well, why not offer me one?
Too early.
Margaret, I want to talk seriously to you.
Now what have I done?
Well, it's what you've not done. Oh, no, don't stop me. See, I'm not exactly unsuccessful, and, well, it's a year ago since Tommy died. Well, Margaret, why won't you marry me?
Richard, please don't spoil everything. You know, I've told you.
Yes, I know you have, and I'm sick of hearing it. I want to know the real reason.
Probably somebody wanting to sell a vacuum cleaner. Like a demonstration?
Good afternoon. You are Mrs. Margaret von Hamilton?
Yes, that's right.
May I have a word with you, please?
Will you come in, please?
Well, it's rather a private matter.
You may speak in front of Mr. Neal. Mr.
Mullin, Detective Inspector Mullin. I wonder if you could tell us anything about a revolver which was found in the roof of Cove Cottage where you were living about a year ago.
Oh, you're worrying about the license.
Oh, not quite, sir. We were wondering if Mrs. Hamilton could tell us how it came to be found in the roof.
I'm afraid I can't help you, but I'm trying to remember what happened to my revolver. I bought one, you know, from Owen, the hardware store, or didn't you know?
Is that so?
It was my husband's idea after I'd had an unpleasant interview with a tramp. But I found somehow having a loaded revolver around the place was even more frightening. So I just put it away somewhere and forgot all about it.
Oh, yes.
But I'm sure I didn't put it in the roof.
Well, I won't take up any more of your time, Mrs. Hamilton. It's all right, I can see myself up. I suppose you've heard from friends in the village that the discovery of this revolver has caused quite a lot of local gossip.
I never had any friends in the village.
Good afternoon.
Well, what do you think of our London policemen?
I don't like them, Richard. They're so unnecessarily mysterious. For instance, they must have proved it was my revolver that was found in the roof.
Why?
Well, there've been any amount of tenants at Cove Cottage, yet they come to me for information.
Yes, but if he knew it was yours, he would have said.
Just wondering why he didn't.
The late Thomas Hamilton was your son, Mrs. Wilde?
Yes, by my first husband.
I believe that you and your second husband stayed with the Hamiltons at Cove Cottage at one time.
Oh, yes. We came to England from South Africa and stayed with them before going on to Canada. We left their cottage for Southampton the day before my son died. I got the news on board the liner.
Nasty shock for you.
terrible. I returned immediately to Margaret, and my husband, my second husband, went on to Canada. I joined him in Montreal later. Since then, I've lost him, too.
I'm sorry to hear that.
He was killed in the railway disaster at Algoma.
And are you living permanently in England now?
Oh, no, only a visit. Chiefly to be near Mrs. Hamilton. We are very fond of one.
Well, as you can't tell us anything about the revolver, I'll be getting along. Hello.
Hello.
Dad, I rather wanted to have a word with you.
Well, I can spare you a couple of minutes, Richard. What's the trouble?
As a matter of fact, it's Margaret. Oh. Well, there's been a lot of silly talk about her husband's death. Who's doing the talking? Police.
What, police?
A man named Mullin, detective inspector.
I know him.
He's been bothering Margaret for about a week. And Mrs. Wyatt.
What's he been bothering him about?
Well, some fool found a revolver in a roof at Cove Cottage. It was hers, Margaret's. And the village found out and started talking, and they've been worrying her with questions about how Tom came to die and a lot of other nonsense. I was wondering if you could do anything about it. You see, she's so terribly worried.
Hello? Home Office? Mr. Arbuthnot, please. Pleasure, Norman. I'll make inquiries and ring you back. I suppose the police haven't been asking you any questions?
Of course not. Why should they?
No, I was only wondering whether they knew that you were a friend of Margaret's before Tom died.
What of it? There's nothing wrong in it. Well, you know that.
Of course they do, but you know how these things can be twisted. Hello? Speaking. I'm very grateful, old man. Well, Arbuthnot tells me that the Home Office has granted an order for the exhumation of Thomas Hamilton.
Is Mrs. Hamilton ready, Mr. Neal?
She's waiting in the chapel.
I take it that the widow identified the coffin, Inspector Mullin?
Yes.
We cannot be too sure of that.
Have you finished your examination, Sir Denton?
The rest must be done in the laboratory.
And we'll have your written report in due course, sir?
As a matter of fact, Inspector, you can have the most important part of it now.
A bullet?
Lodged in the base of the spine.
Do you believe that was the cause of death?
I do.
Then it's murder.
Or suicide?
I'm afraid we must rule out any possibility of suicide.
I can offer no explanation, Mr. Neal.
But you cannot appreciate the seriousness of your position, Mrs. Hamilton. Here you are alone in the house when your husband is taken ill and dies. He is buried under a certificate of natural death. Then a revolver, your revolver, is found in the roof with one chamber discharged. Now we discover that the bullet, probably the same bullet, is in your husband's body. And you offer no explanation.
I tell you, I know nothing.
Do you realize that the police are already talking of murder?
I can't help it.
Mullin will intensify his inquiries now. Every detail in the lives of all concerned will be examined.
I tell you again, I don't know anything about it.
In view of all the circumstances, Mrs. Hamilton, I am forced to the conclusion that you must know something about it. And I'm asking you to tell me now, as a friend, what everybody must know soon.
I have nothing to tell.
Well, I must give you a serious warning. This matter will not be dealt with in a regularly constituted court of law, but in a coroner's court. And that is a vastly different matter. In such a court, Mrs. Hamilton, you must realize that no power in the land can protect you from possible grave injustice and certain cruel defamation. Now will you let me help you?
You cannot.
If there had been a will, the document or its provision would be on record here.
Well, what about insurance?
Well, there's no record of it.
Well, he must have had some money once. Perhaps Carey Street can help me. Thanks.
Hamilton went bust there before he died.
What about the insurance policies?
They may have been in the form of a settlement, in which case his wife would have benefited.
I'd like to know definitely.
I'll have a look. No, the wife didn't benefit. The official receiver took surrender value.
Did you know this was here? Funny place for a personal letter.
Expect he got here when Hamilton turned his business papers in.
Well, we shall want it. It's important.
Then you'll have to come back with an order for it.
Right.
Like special? Fire? Cover that victim story.
Don't forget, get some pictures.
Seems I'm well on the way to becoming a notorious woman, Richard. I even might aspire to the crowning achievement of writing my life story for the Sunday newspapers.
Oh, now, Margaret.
Oh, this is nothing to what it's going to be.
Well, the old man will put everything right at the inquest.
Inquest to be held in the schoolroom.
Yes, the kiddies have got a holiday.
So's the entire village. Roman holiday.
God send this for you, eh? Job to know where to put us all.
You said it. He's got the Home Office pathologist in Queen Elizabeth bed. I've clicked for the room where Dick Turpin slept. Is this her?
Yes. John's with her.
How fortunate to have met you, Mrs. Hamilton. I'm Lily Prudence of the Daily Reflector. You've heard about my cloistered corner, of course.
Oh, please, not just
I know,
now.
in times of stress, sympathy's a great help, isn't it? Could we have a little chat together?
Well, I think Mrs. Hamilton's rather tired after her journey.
Oh, you're Mr. Neal, aren't you?
Well, I'm rather tired, too.
Not
Excuse me.
too tired, surely.
Neil, there's a gentleman waiting in the coffee room.
Oh, is there? Thank
I'll
you.
go to my room, Richard.
All right.
Hasn't she ever heard of your 2 million readers, Prudy?
I don't know. They'll soon be hearing about her. I liked the bodyguard, though, didn't you?
I got here about an hour ago.
Well, I'm grateful to you, Dad, for giving up your time to something which, after all, is no concern of yours.
Isn't it, Richard? It's a concern of yours. And I'm rather unhappy about it.
You mean professionally as well?
Just a bit. At the moment, I've got absolutely nothing to work on. Give me a sandwich. Mrs. Hamilton has one reply to all my questions. She doesn't know.
Oh, then she doesn't, then.
Rubbish, my boy. Of course she does. She's hiding something. Something she's afraid to tell even me.
But for what reason?
Well, if Mrs. Hamilton won't help, I must try to glean something from the other side. Oh, I should get to bed early tonight, my boy, if I were you.
We've got all the evidence we want for a conviction, Mr. Knight.
It sounds very grave.
And we shall arrest Mrs. Hamilton being on top of the inquest.
Should the inquiry confirm our suspicions?
Naturally, sir.
Calls for a particularly detailed investigation.
That'll be safe in your hands, sir.
Well, this case has attracted a lot of attention. It will get national publicity.
In fact, Redcombe will be front-page news.
Indeed, it will.
And so will you.
Oh, I wasn't thinking about that, Inspector Mullen. I only wanted to point out that in view of the wide attention, we must examine every detail with minute care.
Well, you won't have much difficulty in reaching a verdict. The revolver evidence alone sticks out a mile.
I understand Mr. Knight is working late.
Yes, sir, he has the inspector with him.
The inspector?
Yes, sir, undoubtedly. Come.
I know you won't mind my coming in, as we're all concerned on the same business. And I wanted to pay my respects before we meet in court, sir.
That's a very happy idea. Sit down, Mr. Neal.
Thank you. I always think that in these cases, a little preliminary discussion does away with a lot of unnecessary business in court.
I don't think there will be much unnecessary business in this case, Mr. Neal.
So then I gather that you've already discussed it pretty thoroughly.
Naturally, we have to rely on the police for...
Guidance?
Information.
That is where the police have the advantage in these courts.
I assure you, Mr. Neal, nothing will prejudice your client's interests.
I'm sure it won't. Not with a fair-minded man like yourself, Mr. Knight.
Ought we to discuss this case with Mr. Neal, sir? He doesn't appear in it until tomorrow.
I don't wish to discuss the case unduly.
I see no reason why...
Well, In view of Inspector Mullen's attitude, I don't wish to place you in an embarrassing position.
I do hope there won't be any unpleasantness.
I hope not. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. You want to watch him, sir?
I thought he seemed quite a nice little man.
That's his way of getting information. If you're not careful, he'll be taking charge of your proceedings for you tomorrow.
Oh. Will he?
Silence!
You have heard William Trelease testify to the finding of the revolver, which led to the inquiries which have resulted in these proceedings. You have heard him testify that he found this revolver with one chamber discharged. And you have heard the evidence of Mr. Owen, which proves beyond doubt that this revolver was sold by him to Mrs. Hamilton. Then you have heard Detective Inspector Mullen's evidence of the exhumation of the body of Thomas Hamilton and the identification by Mrs. Hamilton. And now you have heard Sir Denton Hume prove that the bullet found in Thomas Hamilton's body was fired by this Mrs. Hamilton's revolver. I have called Sir Denton again because he has been hurriedly called back to London. Now, Sir Denton, what we do not know is how this unfortunate man came to be buried under a certificate of natural causes. Was there anything else to account for the man's death?
That bullet was the cause of his death.
But a doctor would see a bullet wound.
Had he looked for it?
Do I understand you to mean that a man might be shot to death and the fact could escape a doctor's observation? Surely there would be blood about?
Not necessarily. I have known cases where not only was there a total absence of external bleeding, but the bullet hole was barely discernible even when looked for.
Seems extraordinary. Most extraordinary.
When I shoot things, sir, they usually bleed.
Yes, in due course.
I should like to ask the doctor, after I've asked Sir Denton a few questions, about the possibility of this wound being self-inflicted.
You heard Sir Denton say this can't be so.
Nevertheless, sir, I suggest that...
Quite.
I register protest.
Very good, sir. We now come to another and even more important matter. These tins were found in a heap of rubbish in the garden shed at Cove Cottage. The police have proved they were bought by Mrs. Hamilton from a hardware store in the town. They are empty weed killer tins. You found traces of arsenic in the body?
Of considerable quantities of arsenic.
Ah, was the quantity sufficient to cause death?
I have already said that the bullet was the cause of his death.
I mean, could Hamilton, before he was shot, have been suffering from a form of arsenical poisoning?
Could this arsenic have been given medicinally?
It could, but if so, the quantities were exceptionally large.
Were you able to determine the nature of Hamilton's last meal?
Yes, of some highly spiced food.
Such as curry?
Such as curry.
But not necessarily curry?
Not necessarily curry.
Silence! Thank you, Sir Denton.
But I want to ask Sir Denton a few questions about arsenic.
You will have every opportunity, sir, if circumstances warrant it. Thank you, Sir Denton. That will be all.
Thank you.
Now, we will have Dr. McFarlane, please.
Hold the book in your right hand. The evidence you give before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God, kiss the book. So help me God.
Now, tell the court, doctor, are you surprised to learn that your patient died from injuries caused by a bullet wound?
No.
You are not surprised?
I've been a GP long enough to have forgotten what surprise is.
I need not remind you, Dr. McFarlane, that you issued a certificate of death from natural causes.
I did, on the advice of my locum.
Your locum? Oh, Detective Inspector Mullen informs me that your locum tenens has since settled in New Zealand and that an affidavit is on the way. However, we will leave that for the moment. Now, tell me, would you think your patient likely to take his own life?
I want witness to be warned before he answers that question.
Kindly restrain yourself, sir. You are not in London now.
If I'm not accorded the privilege of protecting my client, I might as well not be here.
But you are the best judge of that, sir. Now, I repeat, doctor, he would not commit suicide.
Last man in the world, I should think.
Did your locum tenens know the general state of Hamilton's health before he went?
No, but he knew the nature of his complaints. I gave him the case cards.
In that case, he would not be surprised to find him dead when he got there.
Certainly not. I shouldn't have been surprised myself. Hamilton might have died any minute.
Or he might have lived.
Years, perhaps. Pure or fluke, either way. Dr. McFarlane, would you for any reason have made a closer examination than your deputy?
Well, I hardly know what to say.
Yes or no? No.
Thank you, Doctor. But what reason are you hinting at, Mr. Neal?
From the doctor's frequent visits, I inferred that he would be very familiar with the life these people led. I'm quite satisfied with his answer.
But I am by no means satisfied, sir. You have forestalled me. I was just coming to that very point myself. Now, please don't interrupt me again. Now, Dr. McFarlane, I want to ask you a question of an unprofessional nature.
I'm an old-fashioned doctor, Mr. Coroner.
You are now in the court of law. As a representative of the law of the land, I take no account of professional usages when they obstruct essential sources of information. Now, what opinion did you form as to the relations between husband and wife?
Well, in my opinion, for what it's worth, they were happy. May I put it, you had no reason to suppose they were unhappy? You may.
Dr. McFarlane, Dr. McFarlane.
What's the matter there? Constable. Most inconvenient. Most.
I've been expecting this all the morning. These things will happen, inquest or no inquest.
It's a nuisance, but I suppose it can't be helped. We shall have to release you for the time being, Doctor.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Don't thank me. Well, now, where were we? Yes, a point of profound significance, the arsenic. Now, we have to ask ourselves how this arsenic was administered to Thomas Hamilton and why.
But as Hamilton died with a bullet wound, sir, are we concerned with anything else?
We are concerned with anything that has a bearing on this case.
Mrs. Hamilton, what is all this?
Absolutely bewildered.
Are you surprised at the evidence of the fact or the fact itself?
I tell you, Mr. Neal, this poisoning is a complete surprise to me.
But you did buy arsenic.
Weed killer, yes.
And arsenic was found in your husband's body. Now, what are you hiding?
Mrs. Hamilton, please.
And this predicates another possibility. Was the arsenic plan discovered by the intended victim? And the shooting, the desperate outcome. Now you see how important poison is in this case. It may be of vital importance. Now, Mrs. Hamilton.
Hold the book in your right hand. The evidence you give before the court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God, kiss the book.
Now, what was the state of the relations between you and your husband, Mrs. Hamilton?
We were very happy.
Oh, were you?
I was very fond of him.
And did you enjoy that happiness during the whole of your married life?
At one time, I'm afraid not.
And was it about that time you were meditating a certain course of action?
I'd fallen in love with another man, if that is what you mean.
You were deceiving your husband.
Not in the way you infer.
I infer nothing. I state facts.
But it creates such a wrong impression when you put it that way.
May I say something?
Be quiet, sir.
I was not unfaithful to my husband.
That is a matter between you and your conscience, madam.
But I have nothing on my conscience. The idea is horrible.
Some of us are old-fashioned enough to regard marital deception in any form horrible. I repeat, you were deceiving your husband.
Oh, very well. But I was going to tell him the truth and ask him to release me.
You were going to. Why didn't you?
Well, I can verify that.
Be quiet, sir. I shall order you to leave the court.
How could I ask him to release me? His business affairs had just gone wrong and he had lost all his money.
But this admirable impulse was not strong enough to make you break off this undesirable association.
It was never broken off. Its character was changed.
We shall return to that again in a moment. Now, your husband had discovered this affair with another man. What was the effect of his discovery?
It was a great shock to him.
But he overlooked it.
In time, yes. But it had one result. He became insanely jealous.
Ah, that is why this young man's visits to Cove Cottage were clandestine.
He came down twice, and then only as a friend. I didn't tell my husband because I didn't want to upset him.
And what, in fact, was discussed at these disinterested, friendly meetings? What brought your one-time lover all the way from London to see you?
Richard Neal knew how poor we were. He wanted to pay for a specialist for my husband. But I begged him never to come and see me again while my husband was alive.
Ah, while your husband was alive?
You've no right to make a suggestion of that kind.
Sit down.
I won't. I want to give evidence. I insist on giving evidence.
Richard.
Oh, I don't care. You're making all sorts of foul insinuations. She's telling the truth and you won't believe it.
Will you be quiet?
No, I won't. You brought me into it, and I'm going to stay in it. Everything's being distorted. I say you're not holding an inquiry. You're holding a prosecution. I say you're not presiding over a court of law at all. It's a star chamber.
If you don't behave yourself, sir, I shall deal with you very severely.
But I'm here.
Remove him, Constable. Remove him.
All right.
I tell you, it's all wrong. Wrong. I want to give evidence. Let me go. Let me come there.
All right, Constable. Richard, I got something better for you to do than arguing with coroners. I want you to go to the nearest town with a decent library and get me all the books you can on the subject of arsenic in medicine.
Well, couldn't Dr. McFarlane tell you?
Oh, yes, of course he could, but would he?
Well, you don't mean to say that you think that the doctor...
Well, I can say nothing definitely, but I want you to drive as fast as you can and be back at the George by lunchtime with these books.
Right, I will.
You have stated that Mr. and Mrs. Wyatt left you on the Friday. Would it have been possible for them to have returned that Saturday without your knowledge?
No.
And you had no other visitor or saw no one in the vicinity?
I had no visitor. I saw no one.
Now, we know that your husband was shot between 2 and 3 o'clock that afternoon.
It seems so.
Now, you admit this is your revolver?
Yes.
So, he was shot between 2 and 3 o'clock with your revolver. Now, you have said that you came in and found your husband lying on the sitting room floor. Now, what did you think was the matter with him?
I thought he'd had another of his heart attacks.
What? You thought that unfortunate man in agony from a bullet wound was suffering from a heart attack?
But we do not know that the man was able to say what was the matter with him.
But the witness has stated that her husband was conscious.
Or semi-conscious. A vast difference.
He was conscious enough to ask for water.
Admitted, but I submit that a gravely injured man might by a desperate effort ask for water and yet be incapable of further speech.
Then we will ask the witness. Did your husband make any other remark?
He asked for a doctor.
So he could speak?
With an effort, yes.
And he was conscious enough to have told you that he had been shot?
Had he desired to do so?
Exactly, but he did not.
No.
Had your doctor told you to do certain things when your husband had a heart attack?
To massage him under the heart.
And did you?
Yes.
And even then you still thought he was suffering from a heart attack?
You're asking me the same thing again.
You are there to answer my questions, madam.
Then why are you asking the same questions? Why? I've answered them over and over.
Control yourself.
Control myself? Every moment I'm here, I'm controlling myself. This would be bad enough under any circumstances. You're making it unbearable. You disbelieve everything I say. I can't stand it. It's horrible, horrible.
We will adjourn for lunch.
Hello, Daily Reflector? Oh, Lily Prudence's end. Yes, speaking from Redcombe. Get this down, will you? And get it quick. I want my lunch. Oh, ready? In the heart of a smiling countryside, facing her interrogators in a quaint little village schoolroom, whose very walls seem even now to echo childish trebles.
This is murder.
A tall, beautiful woman, simply dressed, is enacting the terrible role of butterfly on the wheel.
Cut the comedy. Our cheese is
You
getting
don't
cold.
jump off a high place. No, don't put that, you idiot. Oh, where was I? Oh, yes. Whatever her sin may have been. Have you got it?
I wish I knew what you were up to.
It seems absolutely incredible that a woman should deliberately invite incrimination on a charge of murder if she's not anyway in part guilty.
But Margaret's not guilty, Dad.
Nevertheless, everything points to it, especially the way she treats me. But this poison they sprung on us may have a different result from the one they intended. Anyway, it's given me a vague line to work on. Just write this down for me. Formula, footnote 4, page 353.
Everybody's talking about you, sir.
Oh?
Since this case, I've heard more than one say that you're wasted in Redcombe.
Really?
They say you ought to be in London.
Now, perhaps they want to get rid of me.
Oh, you know it isn't that, sir. You know very well they're proud of you.
Yes. This is a very nice lunch, Elsie. I'm sure we're all pleased to know there's peace of mind in the jury.
I understand it's a boy, sir.
Yes, the customary fine specimen, I believe.
It's very kind of you, gentlemen, and I thank you on behalf of my wife and self. I'm only sorry it didn't happen a few hours earlier, but it's our first. Sorry.
Now, well, perhaps you'll arrange things better next time. Silence! Well, now we must get on. Dr. McFarlane is waiting, Mr. Neal.
Just one question. I've compiled a list of complaints for which arsenic is given medicinally, Doctor. Now, did you at any time prescribe arsenic for the dead man? Certainly not. You will swear that even though we know that arsenic was found in the body? Certainly.
You are casting aspersions, Mr. Neal.
My client has leveled the same accusation at you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. McFarlane.
Thank you, sir. Look this way, Doctor, please. Doctor, please, this way.
Mrs. Wyatt, we know that you and your husband came from South Africa and stayed with the Hamiltons before going to Canada. Now, you have stated that you left Cove Cottage on Friday, the day before Thomas Hamilton died.
Mr. Coroner, I should like to ask Mrs. Wyatt one or two questions about her second husband's death.
But there's no mystery about his death, Mr. Neal. He was killed in a railway disaster. Now, you have stated that the Hamiltons were happy. Now, did something happen to disturb this state of harmony during your stay that week? You must tell us what happened, please.
There was a letter.
There was a letter to your daughter-in-law from a certain man which created a scene.
My son was ill, super sensitive. There was nothing in the letter to cause any feelings.
Had your son ever communicated certain suspicions to you?
Suspicion?
Yes. Now think very carefully.
I don't know what you mean.
Perhaps this will assist your memory. Now, is it not clear from your letter that your son had in fact told you that he was in fear of meeting with a violent end? I may say this letter was discovered among Thomas Hamilton's private papers during police investigations. It was written by Mrs. Wyatt from South Africa. Now, you specifically mentioned poison in your letter. Were you answering a definite fear expressed by your son?
No, not a fear. He'd been ill and was abnormal. I think there was some vague reference to an arsenic case he'd been reading.
We have elicited one very important fact, that Thomas Hamilton did on at least one occasion fear that he was in danger of being poisoned. Would you like to ask the witness any questions, Mr. Neal?
Thank you. At the moment, no.
Thank you, Mrs. Wyatt. Yes. Now we will recall Mrs. Hamilton, please. You have heard the evidence of the previous witness. Can you give me any reason why such a letter should have been written?
I cannot.
Now, this letter would be written about 2 months before you moved down to Cove Cottage. Would that be about the time your husband discovered your relations with this man?
Yes?
And you propose to give us no further explanation?
If you propose to put it that way.
You force me to put it that way, madam. It's most unsatisfactory. Most.
We should prefer a more definite answer, sir.
Well, so should I, infinitely. But what can I do? I cannot compel the witness to talk.
Do you wish me to say I threatened to poison my husband?
Really, madam, that attitude will not help you. However, we will pass to another matter of even greater importance. Now, we want to know certain things that happened on the day of your husband's death. Did your husband have curry for lunch?
Yes, he did.
Just one moment, sir.
Now, please don't interrupt me again, Mr. Neal.
Sir Denton gave no evidence that arsenic was discovered in Hamilton's last meal.
I'm not certain about that. However, it will have due consideration in any case. Now, I suppose you realize that a highly spiced substance like curry presents an almost ideal medium for the unsuspected administration of arsenic.
Are you going to assume?
I am going to conduct my inquiry in my own way, Mr. Neal. You know perfectly well I am fully empowered to do so.
But you are deliberately suggesting that my client did administer arsenic.
I am searching for the truth, and I refuse to be restricted by limitations to which perhaps you are more familiar.
Do you realize that you are deliberately suggesting that my client is guilty? And your words will be broadcast with perhaps the most disastrous effect?
I refuse to be dictated to in my own court.
Then I register the most emphatic objection.
Very good, sir. Now, answer, please, Mrs. Hamilton.
I have never given it a moment's thought.
In that case, can you suggest any other way in which the arsenic actually found in your husband's body could have got there?
I am not a pathologist.
Oh, thanks, old-timer. Reflector? Oh, listen, Bill. This is going to be big. Get me out a streamer for tomorrow. While you're about it, book yourself a seat for the Old Bailey. Yes, it's a cert. What's that? Is she getting it hot? This old coroner missed the boat. He should have been a stoker on the Queen Mary.
Your husband was buried by Peters of Dimborne, which is 15 miles away. Are you aware that these peculiar arrangements caused a certain amount of gossip at the time?
I was not aware.
Did you make the arrangements?
I suggested them.
Who carried them out?
Mrs. Wyatt.
Are you sure Mrs. Wyatt did not make the suggestion? I submit, sir, that we've overlooked the fact that Mrs. Wyatt returned from Southampton when she heard of her son's death.
Why do you bring Mrs. Wyatt in?
Have you any reason to wish that the coroner will not remember that Mrs. Wyatt stayed with you and assisted at the funeral arrangements?
You're casting an odious suspicion.
I think you should remember that Mr. Neal is appearing in your interests, Mrs. Hamilton.
Very well. My husband was buried by Peters of Dimborne because there was only one undertaker at Redcombe, and I'd already had a dispute with him about another matter.
And that was the only reason? You didn't want to keep local people out of the house?
Oh, how mean, how pitiless it all is. Of course you're driving me frantic. I answer a question, you repeat another way, far more damaging than the first. Tell me what you want me to say and I'll say it. But I cannot and will not say anything more unless you'll take my word in answer.
Compose yourself.
Compose myself.
We should like to know why Mrs. Hamilton bought a revolver.
It was a suggestion of my husband's. Perhaps at the same time you would like to know why I bought Weed Killer. It was to kill weeds.
You will gain nothing by antagonizing the jury.
I apologize.
Now, this revolver, where was it kept?
In the sideboard drawer in the sitting room.
And where was this revolver when you say you came in and found your husband lying on the sitting room floor?
In the sideboard drawer.
You had no suspicion your husband was shot?
No.
And no reason for taking any interest in this revolver?
None.
Yet you can swear it was in the sideboard drawer. Well, why should you look to see if it was there?
Oh, simply because I went to the drawer to get a box of matches.
Why did you want a box of matches?
Oh, really,
Go on, please.
I wanted to light the lamp.
Why did you want to light the lamp at 3 o'clock in the afternoon?
Well, because the windows at Cove Cottage are tiny, and my husband's bed was on the wall opposite the windows in the shadows. Now do you understand?
So you wanted to light the lamp to tend your husband?
Isn't that sufficiently obvious?
A lamp by his bed?
Of course.
Then if you wanted to light over his bed, he was lying on the bed. I say your husband was lying on that bed.
Yes.
And how could he be lying on the bed if he was in the sitting room downstairs? If he was upstairs, the court must be told how you got in there. Mr. Coroner, witness has stated that she was in the house alone.
Yes, yes, you must tell us how you got in there.
Who helped you?
No one helped me. I was alone.
Any doctor will tell the court that this man's injuries would have paralyzed him from the waist down. Now, I ask the jury to look at this woman and to remember that Hamilton was a man of large physique.
But he was wasted by ill health.
I say it was impossible for this woman to have moved him upstairs alone.
If you insist on your contention, Mr. Neal...
do. It is vital.
Then we can easily dispose of it by asking who helped.
I was alone in the house, I tell you. No one helped me.
In view of the witness's statement, Mr. Neal, we will proceed with the inquiry.
Is any member of the jury familiar with the interior of Cove Cottage? I know it quite well. Then, in your opinion, could this woman have got a helpless and gravely injured man upstairs unaided?
But, Mr. Neal...
No, please, sir, it is imperative that the jury answer my question. The gravest issues are at stake. I ask again, could she have got this man upstairs unaided? Not to my mind. She could not.
I will instruct the jury.
Then I apply for an adjournment.
No, no, no. I can't go through all this again.
In view of all the evidence...
I demand an adjournment. I demand that the jury be given an opportunity of inspecting Cove Cottage. I want to know who you are shielding.
He's wrong. I'm not shielding anybody.
In view of your client's admission, an adjournment is not necessary.
No, an adjournment is not necessary.
The jury are not satisfied. I ask them if they would like to satisfy their conscience. I ask the foreman to tell the coroner whether he is satisfied.
I don't want an adjournment.
We think we ought to see the cottage, sir.
Very well. If you prefer to accept other guidance, the court is adjourned till 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
I maintain that how that dying man was got up these stairs is the pivot on which this whole case rests. Oh, I want you to help us, if you will. And now, Mrs. Hamilton had to get her dying husband from the sitting room floor where he was lying up these stairs into the bedroom. Mr. Foreman, will you be good enough to lie here, please? Now, Mr. Leese, we'll imagine that you are Mrs. Hamilton. Will you try and get him upstairs? Do you want some assistance? You, sir.
I'll try my best, sir. Couldn't someone else hold his head, sir? And I can take his feet, and with Mary supporting the small of his back, maybe we can manage it, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Talese. You see, it is proved. Not one, not two, but 3 people would have been required to get Hamilton up these stairs.
But it's practically self-incrimination. Why must Mrs. Hamilton say that she did this when she obviously couldn't?
Perhaps the inspector may be able to help you, Mr. Coroner. Thank you, Mr. Foreman. Did Margaret ever mention anyone named Burgoyne to you?
Burgoyne?
John Burgoyne. Oh, Mrs. Wyatt, did she ever speak of him?
Well, I've never heard of the chap.
I begin to see... Richard, I have now proved conclusively that Margaret was not in the house alone, but why does she insist that she was?
Well, after this coroner's business today, the papers will be plastered with insinuations that she murdered her husband.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
Well, what are you going to do?
Away from my instructing solicitors, who are also Mrs. Wyatt's solicitors.
Received following cable addressed Mrs. Wyatt. Please communicate information to her. Regret to inform you, John Burgoyne died 3:15. Signed, Medical Officer, Saranac Falls Sanatorium, Quebec. But what's it all about?
Treat it as absolutely confidential. And I want you to go to the South Entrance shipping office and find out all the information you can about the sailing of the Wyatts for Canada. While you're there, send this cable. I want further information about this John Burgoyne, but we must have it quickly. I must have an answer back from Quebec at once. Oh, and ask the maid to tell Mrs. Wyatt I'd like to see her.
Right.
Ah, Mrs. Wyatt, I've just received some information that concerns you. Come, sit down, will you? Do you think you've been quite fair with me?
Fair?
Well, truthful. You have given us all to suppose that you led a normal, happy life with your husband.
Oh, well, of course we had our differences.
You met him in South Africa. He was charming, you were lonely. But how long was it before you discovered that he'd married you for your money?
Oh, I don't...
I've got here some cuttings from South African papers. You summoned Charles Wyatt for assault and described him as a very violent man.
It isn't the sort of thing one advertises.
I believe he spent all your money except a settlement. Your son had to consent before that could be realized. Was Charles Wyatt wanting that money to go to Canada with? And your son wouldn't agree.
Oh, why are you asking me all these questions?
I hope to prove that this man who met such a tragic fate in Canada was clearly implicated in the death of Thomas Hamilton.
Yes, but in the face of the seemingly overwhelming evidence against such a possibility, sir, I mean, you would have to prove that Wyatt was at Cove Cottage on the Saturday.
Obviously.
That he escaped Mrs. Hamilton's observation.
Naturally.
That he found Mrs. Hamilton's revolver and shot Hamilton with it. That he returned it to the sideboard drawer.
That is so.
And explained Mrs. Hamilton's highly peculiar ignorance of the cause of her husband's suffering.
Yes.
And do you hope to explain why Mrs. Hamilton should hide the weapon in the roof instead of communicating with the police?
I do.
And you would have to account for the arsenic found in the body.
I agree.
Then what do you suggest?
That I have your permission to proceed.
I fully appreciate your anxiety for your client, but you've already received unusual consideration, sir.
Am I to construe that as a threat to terminate my questions?
No, there's no occasion for the generation of heat. I say again, you've had every consideration. I will go further and venture the opinion that you are trying to construe this inquiry from the death of Thomas Hamilton into an examination of the life and character of Charles Wyatt.
I emphatically refute such an allegation.
And I as emphatically repeat it.
You are trying to overrule material evidence which is favorable to my client.
This is my court and my ruling governs it.
Admitting that your court is constituted under exceptional powers, I will remind you that it is nonetheless dedicated to the cause of justice.
I refuse to take up that most impertinent challenge. You are deliberately trying to take the conduct of this inquiry out of my hands.
That is an accusation foreign to me in the whole of my experience. His Majesty's judges in the High Court and the Court of Appeal have always accorded me courtesy. The Judicial Committee of the House of Lords have listened to me with some mark of respect, but I must come to your court to be insulted.
The personal implications are non-existent.
Members of the jury, my only concern in this case is with Mrs. Hamilton. And because I know she is innocent, because I'm trying to save her from further degradation and suffering, because I'm trying to save her perhaps from herself, I am made the target of abominable accusation.
You mistake me.
I do not mistake you, sir. If that is an invitation for me to proceed, I will do so. But I did not mistake you.
Very well. We will put it that you have gained your point.
As between yourself and myself, sir, these matters are affairs of the moment.
A very nice spirit.
Then, with your permission, I should like to resume my questions. Mrs. Hamilton, After your remarkable feat of strength in alone conveying your husband up those stairs, you finally decided that a doctor was necessary.
Yes. Directly after I lit the lamp over his bed.
Was he conscious when you went to telephone for the doctor?
He'd gone quiet and still and was scarcely breathing.
And when you came back?
He hadn't moved.
He was dead?
Yes.
Was it dark when the doctor arrived?
Almost.
He was a complete stranger to you?
Yes.
Did you go into the room with him?
No, I waited for him to come out. Directly he saw me, he said, "There is no need for me to tell you. Your husband is dead."
He said that? He said your husband was dead?
He was dead.
What did you say?
I was so dazed by the suddenness and horror of it, I don't think I said anything.
Ah, quite. Now, did he go downstairs into the sitting room?
There was no need to.
Was the sitting room door open?
No, closed.
Closed. So that if anybody was in the sitting room, he couldn't have seen them?
No.
Exactly. Now, have you anything to add?
No.
Think. Mrs. Hamilton, do you realize that this officer is only waiting the finding of the court to arrest you on a charge of murder, and you know you are innocent? Answer me! Somebody else knows that you are innocent, or did know. More than one person. Now, will you tell us the name of the guilty person or persons? Was Richard Neal in the vicinity of Cove Cottage that day?
No, and you have no right to suggest it.
Are you sure?
How can you say such a thing?
Did you have any visitor at all at Cove Cottage that day?
No, no, no!
Then I can do no more for you. I have no other questions to ask, Mr. Coroner.
Eh? Oh. Very well. And Mrs. Hamilton, I don't think...
Just one more question, sir. Mrs. Hamilton, who is John Burgoyne?
I don't know.
Sir, with your permission, I should like you to call Mrs. Wyatt. Mrs. Wyatt, I'm going to take a very grave step. But before I do, I'm going to give you one more opportunity to tell me all you know.
I have nothing to tell.
Very well. I am recalling you, Mrs. Wyatt. After this court closed yesterday, I sent a messenger to Southampton. He went to the offices of the company controlling the vessel you were sailing on with your husband. On the company's files, he found a letter from Mrs. Wyatt cancelling these berths, and that letter was dated on the Wednesday before Hamilton's death. On the Sunday, that is the day following Hamilton's death, Mrs. Wyatt re-engaged these berths in person. Is that correct, Mrs. Wyatt?
Yes. We changed our minds.
Why?
We just did.
So you decided to go to Canada without the capital your husband had set his mind on getting? Or were you aware of your son's death before you rebooked these passages?
How could I know when I was in the car all day going to Southampton?
Very well. Mrs. Wyatt, you have given us to understand that you loved your son.
He was all I had.
And did your husband really meet his death in that Canadian railway disaster?
I've told you.
I have looked up the details of that disaster. There were a number of bodies charred beyond recognition. You identified one of these bodies as that of your husband?
Yes.
Now, when and why did you return to England?
About 3 months ago. Principally to see Margaret.
You'd planned to go back to Canada?
I intended to, but this inquiry prevented my doing so.
Why were you going back?
I like Canada.
For no other reason?
No.
Not to see John Burgoyne, for instance. Who is John Burgoyne? Mrs. Wyatt, what happened 2 weeks after you realized that inquiries had been set afoot?
I don't know what you mean.
Do you know an institution called the Saranac Falls Sanatorium, Quebec?
I have heard of it.
Well, I have made inquiries, and this is the reply I have from the superintendent. He tells me that a man named John Burgoyne entered that institution on August 16th. Now, will you tell us about John Burgoyne?
He is a friend.
I say there's no such man as John Burgoyne. Now tell the court who is concealed under that name.
He doesn't know. It's all suggestions.
Suggestions? I'll make suggestions. I'll suggest how Mrs. Hamilton got her husband up those stairs that Saturday. I suggest that you were there, that your husband was there. I suggest that you return with your husband in a final effort to get that money. I suggest that you were there all day, that you were in the sitting room when the doctor's locum arrived, waiting in terror to know the result of his visit. I suggest that his failure to see that bullet wound was seized upon as a means of escape, and that this fortuitous circumstance was seized upon, not by you, not by Mrs. Hamilton, but by another. You didn't realize what you were doing, and when you did, your discretion was outweighed.
But do you mean to say...
I suggest that these women have been caught up out of their ordinary lives and plunged into tragedy by a circumstance that might have happened to any of us. But they've acted as they've done, not for greed or gain, but out of loyalty and love.
But what about the arsenic?
I suggest that it was Charles Wyatt, who for years had been suffering from an incipient and secret complaint for which arsenic was administered.
But do you mean to say...
I suggest, sir, no, I assert, that the body now lying in Redcombe Cemetery is not the body of Thomas Hamilton at all.
What?
It is the body of Charles Wyatt. And he was shot by your husband, Thomas Hamilton. Admit it.
All right, he did shoot him. But it was only in self-defense. Charles Wyatt was mad with rage about the settlement. He was threatening my husband's mother, and my husband was weak and ill. There was only one way he could protect her, and he fired on impulse. He didn't mean to kill him.
Sit down, everybody. The court is not adjourned.
These women have lied only to protect the man they loved. They've been forced into this incredible situation. But in view of further proceedings that will follow, I want to recall that they have acted as they have done in ignorance of one important fact. I received this telegram from Mrs. Wyatt's solicitors yesterday.
Do you wish me to read it aloud?
If you please, sir.
Received following cable addressed Mrs. Wyatt. Please communicate information to her. Regret inform you John Burgoyne died 3:15. Signed Medical Officer Saranac Falls Sanatorium, Quebec. Do you mean to say that John Burgoyne was Thomas Hamilton?
I do, sir.